Welcome back to Recurrent Events, episode 8. And back with me today is Mr. Wes Schantz. Welcome back, Mr. Wes Schantz.
Hey, happy Friday.
Happy Friday. It's always nice to have a Friday episode. It's like a nice treat before the weekend. So we wanted to talk today about this recent sort of phenomenon over at least the last 3 years, definitely the last 2 years, and definitely even the last few months of teacher strikes, unions, and their relationship to charter schools. And just to sort of lay it out there, I am, of course, a charter school teacher in California, credentialed teachers, and I am a California primary credential holding teacher. You can look it up online if you want to. And so this issue of what's been happening in Oakland with their teachers union and the LA and in LA with their teachers union, and recently in West Virginia, recently in New York, recently also in, where was the other place, Wes? There's one other place.
West Virginia. There's a big one in West Virginia that's been going on for over a year, off and on.
Off and on. Wow. And so we thought that would be very important, especially if we get a chance to talk to your good friend, Mr. Joe Worthy, tomorrow, somebody who seems to work in this sort of sphere of organizing unions and walkouts and perhaps being a part of collective bargaining, that we might sort of talk about our connection to this issue. And so I sent you several pieces of information today, several sources, several of them conservative, some of them liberal as well, just about sort of it looks as if we've seen some themes come up in all of these different union sort of struggles. And do you think it would be useful to lay some of those out? Because I can think of at least 3 that I would put on the table that each one of these strikes has centered around.
Well, yeah. I think that, as you say, it's very important to suggest there's a coherence to the narrative, although it doesn't always emerge in each of the perspectives that people take on it, right? It emerges as you kind of look at the whole field of things, and particularly when you factor in your own sort of stake in this. As a teacher, I'm not in California, and I'm not part of a teachers union or anything like that here in Washington. I'm a substitute teacher, so I don't have a personal stake in it quite the same way. But I do, as someone who's worked in charter schools, feel like, I want to see them given a fair chance, and I want to see, students given the opportunity to have an actual education, if that's, possible within a school setting. I've seen it work, so I feel like it is, but I don't know that charter schools are getting a really their side heard necessarily in a lot of the reporting. So that's at least one of the themes that I was kind of hoping we could pick up on. But what else do you see kind of emerging from all of these different stories?
Well, I was going to start with just saying the demands, but let me just say a couple things about charter schools and charter schools in New York in particular and in California, and then a couple of comments in general about charter schools, and then some of the demands these unions have been making, because they seem to be identifying or spotlighting or pinpointing part of the problem for their decreasing test scores and lack of success and low pay and low so-called low pay, because of course they make more money per year experience per education than charter schools, which is true in every single state. They also receive funding for their buildings that charter schools do not. But just some facts about charter schools as well. Charter schools are about 10% of the schools in New York. I'm not sure what it is in California, but my charter school personally has been around for longer than charter schools have been legal in New York, which I believe is 20 years now, since 1999. In New York, and just to sort of nip in the bud some of the statistics that people get wrong, over 80% of charter students are low income and 91% are African American or Hispanic. That's a figure from City Journal, from their recent bit of audio called Charter Schools and Teacher Strikes, which came out 2 days ago. And so part of what the demands of the unions have been is that they want higher pay over the next 2 or 3 years. I think it's 12% that they demanded over 3 years in New York, It's, I think, a little bit lower in West Virginia. It might have even been higher in the LA in the LA union strike. Oh yeah, and the Oakland one, they want more pay too. The second thing they're demanding is more money for resource staff, like special education teachers and counselors, and potentially these days security as well. Support staff, basically, they not to be polemic about it, but they essentially are trying to bloat the administration in the same way that the universities have. They seem to think that more resource personnel will then lead to more resources, which will then lead to better results with their students. But there's a problem with that reasoning, which is actually they've received in New York over the last 10 years, and this is also true in LA. I think we talked about that article very recently, that actually these schools are receiving, the public district schools are receiving more money per student than they were 10 years ago. And something like 20 out of 70 underperforming schools in New York still got closed. It might have even been in the reverse, that only 20 like met standards or something like this. These schools are receiving more resources. Their teachers, as their careers get longer, are making more and more money. There is a standardized structure by which a district teacher, at least in California, can go to a certain amount of professional developments and get a certain amount of continuing education credits, no matter what the quality of them are or the content, and steadily be moved up in pay scale. That's not the case at my particular charter school. I don't know if that's the case in any charter schools, because certainly they can't afford that. And so that sort of brings us to the last demand that I've seen in both New York, which does have a cap on their number of charter schools, which are outperforming their district schools. And what New York's teachers union demanded is a moratorium, or rather to keep that hard cap on the charter schools, whereas the LA teachers union, as well as the Oakland one, and I'm not sure if West Virginia too, but it could be the case, demanded a moratorium on charter schools. A desire to keep them from continuing to proliferate, because part of their claim is that, well, even though they've been receiving more money per student, and if they only had more resource staff, and if these charter schools were not bleeding them dry of their good students and of their good teachers, they would be doing better. And so they're trying to blame charter schools seemingly for everything. Just one thing I would note about the good teachers thing is that they obviously offer more money than charter schools. So just basic economics there would suggest that you would want to teach there. B, many schools in California offer what's called tenure after 2 years, which is one of the reasons you can't fire bad teachers, which charter schools do not offer. So you have more protection of your job. And C, you have entrance, of course, into a union, though I luckily do not have to pay into one that I'm not a member of now because of the Janus decision we talked about recently. But you also have more legal protections. So you're sort of in the system. So also, I would not have been able to get a job at a district school in California without a preliminary credential. So I couldn't have even gotten my foot in the door in the same way that I got my foot in the door at a charter school. I had a master's degree in what I was teaching, of course, but I had to get a temporary credential while I pursued my credential in my first years. So it's definitely not the case that the charter schools are stealing all the talent. The so-called regular district schools have everything to offer, except for the success that charter schools have been seeing, which seems to be why underserved people who are traditionally underserved and people of color and everybody is choosing them.
Right. Yeah. There's like long waiting lists, at successful charter schools and networks. I think that in West Virginia, part of what just happened is that they were going to include in the bill that, included the pay raise that teachers had wanted when they struck last year. They were going to include something about opening some charter schools. Like, I think that they might not even have any in West Virginia right now. And I think that is actually what led the teachers there to strike again. And then they had that budget bill that was going to include some funding for charter schools, it didn't pass. So they're kind of back to square one. And this is like showing you, I think, what is really the most important thing for these teachers. Is it the pay raise and maybe the certain amount of authority or prestige that goes with that? Is it the solidarity with their students that they need to, which I think the LA teachers really effectively put on display, or is it that they really want to retain a status quo of the kinds of schools that are obviously not functioning? It seems like that is really what it comes down to, that the schools are not functioning for the students very well, but they're working great for teachers, right? Who seem to be very, have great job security. They got, like you say, you get tenure for all that. In a lot of places, there's very high teacher turnover. Even so, it's not necessarily that teachers are being weeded out because they aren't skilled. It's because they're, in many cases, leaving sort of impossible situations that they're tired of beating their head against a wall, with whether it be the administration, whether it be the kind of curriculum that they're force feeding these kids, or it's just, there's so many kinds of disastrous consequences that are really obvious to anyone who walks into a school, that are just not part of the conversation, I think, in the discussions of the teachers union, striking for higher pay and striking to prevent charter schools coming in. The teachers, that is, the unions, want to sort of align themselves with the students, but when you look at what's actually going on, it seems clear that that's really not their priority at all. And so you mentioned you're not part of a union, at least the main, public school union. Is there any kind of union for your particular school or among charter schools there?
Not to my knowledge. I mean, I'm not an individual contractor. I do sign a W-2, not a 1099. So I am an employee of this particular institution. But because of that, and this is something that I think should be noted too. One thing I think charter school teachers who do universally make less money than their district fellows who work in districts similarly funded, and maybe not even similarly funded, frankly speaking, but who have the same level of experience and education, is that, teachers can make more money. But one thing that's almost universally true of teachers, and this is a fact that you'll be able to see on one of the links I'm going to post here, is that teachers have very robust healthcare packages, often worth up to something like $13,000 a year. And so that should be considered when one considers their sort of low pay, especially in Oakland. One of their major gripes was that they don't make even though competitively they make as much as other teachers, if you factor in cost of living, they don't. It should also be factored back in how robust and wonderful their healthcare is, because healthcare really is very good in California. It's something that's many of the employers pride themselves on. But no, I'm not personally part of a union. When I was younger in my career, I sort of wished I could be, but I think for careerist reasons rather than a desire to be, a champion of the students. I think, I would have made some connections. I could have talked to people when positions opened up. It would have been easier to hear about them. I mean, it's a giant social network, right? If you have a local union. And I'd have to look into, I'm surely there is like a San Diego, North County, South County union. But I'm not a member of it. And, I think there's a big contrast now just in, Oakland and LA. And a lot of people are saying that they're proud of these teachers showing their students how to affect change. And I have to say that that's not what I see in these. I don't see something that causes me pride, but rather, disgust as an educator in the public sphere who makes less money than his fellows and has fewer protections and potentially will make less money after he retires because he will have made less less a year, and thus my pension will have less money within it. And I have a lower cap at which I can never get to. What I see is them leaving their jobs and their posts to demand more money with the basic misunderstanding of how economics works, while also scapegoating better teachers than they are, both morally and clearly skillfully, from the results, charter schools, and using their the children they're supposed to teach as leverage. That's what I see. Because I'm in my classroom, I'm teaching. I worked really hard today with over 100 students, 50 of whom I had to work on introductory paragraphs to a 5-paragraph essay on Dante using primary sources like Aristotle, Plato, Sophocles, Homer, and Virgil with. So I worked very hard today, and had an hour drive there and an hour drive back. And then I'm doing this for free as well. And that's what a charter school teacher is, I think. I had an 80-minute drive back home yesterday. And so, I'm not just hanging out with a bunch of my friends and demanding more money, which is what I see clearly happening here. I'm not saying that they aren't deluded and think themselves doing right in a sort of a Socratic way where they think they're doing good, but I do think they're either deluded or evil.
So I think the issue there would be their motivations, right? And
Right.
That's right, because all of what we're getting is from the kinds of arguments and the claims and the demands that are put out there. But underneath of that, it's hard not to suspect that there is a certain amount of anger or fear towards charter schools, which are outperforming their public institutions. And I guess that the fact that is not really articulated or addressed makes me suspect more strongly than ever that it's there, because it is so. I think one way that this comes out really clearly is when claims are made that charter schools are funded by billionaires,
Right.
coming in with lots of money that they throw at political campaigns for politicians who support charter schools. And in what sense that is critiqued? Well, what is the logical argument there that billionaires, want to make public education worse so that the graduates come out less prepared to go to college and get degrees, and go in and can't, so that they're not going to be competitors against their business? I don't see the argument. It just doesn't work for me.
And even if you make it an ideological one, it doesn't work, because clearly what public education is becoming right now is an ideological machine. But from the other side, because like we were talking in the pre-show, we don't see anybody, a business plan or a business model is not a difficult thing to decipher. And we don't, I'm open to finding this information, but I don't think we've seen any information indicating that people are becoming wealthy while exploiting children, except for potentially people who are already in public education and hold non-teacher posts, like union officials or district administrators. Perhaps those are the people that should be considered, the people who are actually making lots of money, rather than the charter school teachers who are making less money than their district counterparts with fewer protections and fewer resources. Frankly speaking, our friend Sarah Miller was saying yesterday that there, it might be in somebody's best interest for there to be antipathy between teachers, public, district, and public charter. And sure, but in whose interest would that be? Well, who is making money at this current moment? It's not the teachers, the ones who are striking and the ones who are continuing to do their jobs without striking, like me and you. The state superintendent can make a 6-figure salary, and he's probably not the only person. We could pull up very easily how much the administrators within the school system in California make. And I guarantee it's a lot more than what I make. which you could see my salary schedule. I'm pretty sure either at my school or online, it's not very impressive.
So that,
um,
yeah, I think that the administrative pay is a part of it, but I mean that point that you make about teachers sort of pitted against one another across charter versus regular old public school lines, I think is really, really destructive. Like if you can't actually find out what it's like to teach in these schools and what kinds of things you do and don't have as a charter school teacher, then it's really difficult for a public school teacher to empathize or sort of like see what they're doing, what consequences it has on their fellow teachers, right? And on kids who are going to those charter schools. Like if you just don't have good schools for kids, and they, even if in their argument, like those are sort of the top students, which seems unlikely, but anyway, if they were, and then they were just sort of shunted back into public schools that are underperforming, I don't know that they would automatically like raise the level of those schools, or whether they would just, see what the expectations were and fall to meet them. It just, there's a lot more, I think, that a dialogue that would need to happen between, teachers at your school or other charter schools and teachers who are on strike up in Northern California.
Right. And, the argument that charter schools selectively take the best and the brightest, well, we don't take anybody. The students make, and their parents make a choice. And given the statistics you see in very diverse New York, with 81% of their students being underserved and 90% of their students being Hispanic and Black, you're seeing that people who are traditionally underserved are making the choice to go to charter. And then you will see in the same article that these same students, Hispanic and Black, that do poorly in these district schools have significantly higher state testing scores after they go to charter schools, which means that charter schools are the opposite of A, just cherry picking, and B, racist institutions, because we are getting, and this is also, of course, true in San Diego, which is a very diverse place. Of course, California is a majority Hispanic state, not majority white state, just like New Mexico is these days, as of 2017. But I mean, our results are better, and we are more egalitarian. We do not just cherry pick the people. We do the best with what we have, with whoever comes through the door. And at my personal school, we have a long list. We have a long lottery, but it is a lottery. It is by chance that people get in here. And there's some preference given to students, I think, who come from our elementary school, but they have to themselves get into that elementary school by lottery. And so, it seems to be the case that you might want to give some idea to the idea that building a culture and getting people who are passionate about the job together nets good results, because perhaps we focus more on relationships with the students. And perhaps we put more effort into truly teaching them, because we, every year our necks are on the line, as it were, like, because we cannot be hired back every other year. And maybe it's because we really care about what we're doing that, we transmit useful information to these students, because we're not just teaching them ideology, we're teaching them that which is necessary to be successful on state tests that will make them more successful at getting into increasingly expensive and rigorous and difficult colleges.
Yeah, I think that the students learning something from their teachers as role models, that is something that should probably be examined a little more closely in this discussion too, because if what you're learning is that you will sort of get what you want through intransigence and sort of taking the most drastic action at what seems like very little provocation, then that's a lesson that teachers might live to rue, right? When they get back in the classroom and try to go to discipline that student for something, that kid suddenly has a new kind of weapon at their disposal, namely to, stop working and strike, and say that it's because they're not being respected or valued enough or what have you. I'm kind of interested to see, there are a lot of student activists in secondary schools now. Primarily, it seems like around issues of mental health and gun safety and things like that. But I'd be interested to see if a movement sort of develops of protesting bad teaching or protesting lack of choice if things do go that way and charter schools continue to be kind of smothered. If kids eventually, and with their parents, no doubt would start to protest and say that they're not being served. That's actually the kind of organizing I'd be most curious about is what's going on among students, even more than I'm curious what's going on among charter teachers.
That would be heartening in just that they would be seeming to care more about their education rather than to receive some sort of perceived benefit or resource, right? We've seen so much of that sort of and here's the logic. If you identify yourself as having victim status, then you identify yourself as somebody who is capable of receiving recompense for that status. Therefore, you want to be as victimized as possible to maximize your compensatory profit from that victim status. It's essentially an alternative path to working and producing something by means of skill. And in fact, people are sort of in an Aristotelian way, like he speaks of thieves, turning it into a skill, though he would not agree that something that is by nature non-virtuous or neurotic, as the Jungians would call it, that it could technically be a skill. And Plato, of course, makes the distinction between rhetoric and logic in that way, that it's like cookery or placing the difference between, putting makeup on your face to look skinnier and working out. So just to give a very extended way of looking at that thought, it would harden me quite a bit to see students, rather than demanding more things without understanding the basic economic realities of that they have the best things they can possibly have produced by the public because of the tax money that goes into that is derived from their local income or local property that produces the institutions of secondary learning for them, but to see them actually demanding a good education rather than benefits or less for more. Because we've seen a lot of that, and I even sent you an article right before this, that now schools are trying to ditch remedial, colleges are ditching remedial education courses because they're too hard for some of the students who are too unprepared to go to college. It's like, at what point do you just understand that perhaps not everybody should be going to college and not everybody should be demanding to get everything, but people should be attempting to develop the necessary skills of life that will help them work in a labor force that is capitalist, not socialist, and that you need to have skills in order to produce something.
That's an open question. It sounds like at this stage is that article. I didn't read all of it, but I mean, it does sound like people just don't know yet what the effect of taking away remedial courses will be. Clearly, there's professors who are aghast because this means kids in their classes who don't know how to do, for example, like the big example seems to be like basic math or something like that. They're sort of now on the line to get those students to pass because their job security as professors, unless they've got tenure, which is a lot harder to get as a professor than as a public school teacher, unless they've got tenure, they're kind of on the line to have, happy students, to give them good reviews at the end of the semester. And at the same time, they have probably a much higher calling to their profession to say, we're going to hold these kids to the same high standards that we have been entrusted with as members of this college or university, right? So that notion that you can get rid of a remedial course and somehow have extra tutoring or whatever other services it might be, it seems like a very experimental thing at this stage in response to what is apparently a pretty big problem of students who are placed in remedial courses still not succeeding. So that is a problem, yeah. And whether it's a problem that is solved by getting rid of the remedial courses, by pushing them into classes and putting more pressure on the professors already, trying to do whatever it is that they've been doing, or whether it's something that you solve, I don't know, like you said, by having a different track for kids who are not college ready. Well, that's I guess that's what we'll find out.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I think we've done some interesting work here. I have, I think, 7 articles that we shared amongst each other, and we didn't have a chance, like typical teachers, to touch on everything. And some of the stats that I was either unclear on or couldn't present perfectly, y'all will be able to look up, listeners, and you can make up your minds about this. And, you can, just as you choose to listen to us, you can choose to see what you would like to. And that's sort of, I think, the point of this entire endeavor, that, we consider it sort of our divine duty to provide more choices to people. And we let you all decide. And so, we'll keep putting this information out there, and hopefully it's helpful. And Wes, anything that we missed before we go and enjoy our Fridays?
I'm enjoying it already, man. I wanted to say at some point, just as a substitute teacher, I feel especially kind of icky about strikes, because if there were a strike in my district, I would still want to, go to work, and I potentially would still be able to get to work. And you see that sometimes mentioned in these articles and reports.
Right. I did. I should have asked you about that. I'm sorry. I did see that, like, the substitute force gets played.
It's a topic for another day maybe, but I don't want to be a scab. I don't want to be a strike breaker. But on the other hand, I get paid by the day, by the hour, that I'm there working, whereas teachers who have salaries, they're getting paid whether they're in there or not.
Yes.
And that's, great for them, I guess. Well, I think that in general, I'm just very interested in alternative modes of communication, and education is part of that. And I do hope that these are reaching people who are interested in that. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I think it'd be really interesting to talk to somebody from Oakland, West Virginia, New York, maybe even reach out to one of these guys that wrote this article. Let me see what his name was again. Ray Domenico. He might be a little big for us at this moment, but we've been surprised at some of the people we've gotten to talk to us. And well, the more people we talk to, hopefully the more avenues open up.
Right on. Yeah. Well, we can reach out to him and maybe some of the other writers and people in this area. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, great. Thank you for talking. I too have been enjoying my Friday. You definitely woke me up after my long drive home, and I'm glad that we tackled this today. Very close, very close to the heart. This issue across several dimensions. You being a substitute teacher and a former charter school teacher, and me being a charter school teacher now. It's like, if we're the problem, we'd like to know it and we can fix ourselves. But it might not be the case that we totally are.
Definitely. All right. Well, take care.
See ya. Take care.